Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Conspiracy of Love webinar, The Briefing. My name is Afdal Aziz. I'm coming to you from Venice Beach in California. This is, I believe, week 6 of a weekly briefing we've put together to help people who are interested in their brands and their nonprofits doing something to help with COVID-19. I'm joined by my co-host and partner in Good is a New Cool, Bobby Jones in Brooklyn. Hello, Bobby.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
For those of you who don't know, Bobby and I co-wrote this book, Good is the New Cool. I thought we'd do a plug. We've never done a plug before. You can get this book on Amazon. It came out in 2016, and it's really about this whole world of business as a force for good. That's what led to us, creating Conspiracy of Love, which is our consultancy that works with brands to help them do some good as well. So thanks for joining, Bobby. We also have 3 very special guests today. Joining us is Thérèse Caruso from Zeno Group. Hi, Thérèse.
Hello.
Thérèse is going to join us to share some fascinating research that you've done on how values are shifting amongst people, almost back to the time of the Great Depression and some of the insights and what they mean for brands. Thanks for joining us, Thérèse.
Thank you.
And then we also have Kfir Gavrieli, who is the CEO and co-founder of Tieks, a fashion brand that has created the inspiring Sew Together program. If you haven't seen this, go on Twitter and check this out. This is an incredible movement for good. Tieks challenged their community to sew face masks for frontline workers. The community got involved and have now sewn over 620,000, I believe, right, Kfir?
Yes, that's right.
An incredible amount. Kfir is joining us today to talk about that campaign, how it started, and some of the lessons for brands as well. And then last but not least, we have Ashley Spillane from Impactual. Hi, Ashley. I think Ashley's on mute at the moment.
Hello.
Hi, Ashley. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Ashley was actually going to join us at the Good is a New Cool conference in LA, but we've postponed that to September. So she was kind enough to come and join us today. Welcome. We're going to talk about how brands can get involved in election day, especially around initiatives like Vote Early Day, which we're going to talk a bit more about. So stick around for that. You can send us questions right throughout this webinar using the Q&A function, if you look at the bottom of the screen. And then Bobby's going to be collecting those questions, and we'll have 15 minutes at the end to go through everything. This whole webinar will be broadcast live on YouTube the minute we finish. We will send everybody the link as well. Please sign up to our weekly newsletter so you can stay in touch with these in for every week. Right, so let's dive in. First up, we have Thérèse Caruso from Zeno Group. Thérèse, when I saw the research you guys had done around values, I was immediately intrigued. Tell us a little bit about what Zeno Group is and how long you've been doing this research to begin with, please.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. So Zeno Group is an integrated marketing firm, and we say we're born from public relations. And we have been doing research now on values for at least the last decade. I've been tracking values now for probably over 20 years. And we have our own IP called the Human Project. And the Human Project tracks the values, the differentiated values of different generations. And we track all the generations.
And so what we're going to do is dive in and look at these massive changes that have been going on in the last couple of months across all the different kind of demographics, Gen Z, Boomers, Gen X. First of all, I think you were saying, Thérèse, you've never seen this fast a shift in values before, correct?
We have not. I mean, usually people hold values very dear. And when we do see shifts, we think there is something big going on. But since January of 2020, we've seen some dramatic shifts. And this is among all generations across the board. And actually, the shifts that we're seeing are most akin to the Great Depression.
Well, let's dive in. Let's take a look at some of these slides and the presentation that you have, Thérèse, and we'll come back at the end to do a little bit of a conversation. But yeah, this is super fascinating stuff in terms of if you're working for a brand, a nonprofit, what people are feeling out there as well. And as mentioned, you can keep the questions coming in using the Q&A function at the bottom there. Yeah, please hit us up. We're looking forward to a stimulating discussion at the end. Therese, how's it going? Are you okay? I can help. if you're having some difficulty. I have the presentation here.
Oh, please do. It's telling my share screen is not working right now.
No worries. That's why I have it in advance. Okay, cool. You tell me, and I'll move the slides forward.
Okay, you can move the slide forward.
All right, cool.
So we're calling this research an historic moment. This is a dramatic value shift in this new world we're in since January of 2020. Next slide. So as I just shared, people's personal values don't really shift from month to month, but we have seen this dramatic shifts across all generations. And it looks like this sort of upheaval is the values that people are experiencing now are looking very similar to the values from the Great Depression. We even looked back at 9/11 and the values did shift dramatically, but there was a difference, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So you can go to the next slide. So we looked at 1,000 people across the US from Gen Z all the way up through boomers. Next slide. So as you see here, these are the top values. These are the values that have gone up. So basically we asked people just a couple of questions. First of all, we put 35 values in front of people and we said to them, which of these values are most important to you? And then we asked them a second question. Which of these values have risen and which of these values have fallen since January of 2020? And what we see on this slide is that there is a dramatic rise in values associated with priorities tied to family and relationships and self-sufficiency. The values rising the most from pre-pandemic levels are protecting the family is up at the top, and actually that's up at the top across all generations. That's not that surprising. We also see values like self-reliance and thrift and helpfulness and simplicity. Actually, simplicity went up across all the generations. That one we saw the most dramatic rise on. Also, honesty and stable relationships. And then something very curious, we saw the value of duty go into the top 10, and we have not seen that value in the top 10 since really the Great Depression. The other thing to mention about duty is that when you think about our youth, the youngest generation we were able to talk to is Gen Z. And so when you think about youth, age 15, 16, 17, you don't think of them as saying duty is in my top 10 values. So that is really sort of representative of the fact that these kids are taking on the weight of the world on their shoulders. And we're going to talk generationally in a minute, a little bit more about Gen Z versus millennials versus boomers and Xers. So if you turn to the next slide, actually, when everybody sees this, they always say to me, can you give me some OEs, like some of the outtakes? What are people actually saying? So when you look at this, especially when you look at like a Gen Xer, considering what's happening around the world with COVID, it's more important to be self-reliant. I've been staying safe at home, and for the past 10 days, this is a boomer, not being able to go out to eat or to the movies, or every generation's really feeling this in a very big way. You can turn to the next slide. Now, when it comes to the declining values, there is a plunge in values associated with materialism and self-fulfillment. And among the values experiencing the greatest decline from, again, pre-pandemic levels are power and wealth and even adventure and romance and excitement and ambition. So when you think of values like ambition and excitement going down, you know, we have to sort of ask ourselves, is this going to continue? How are these values going to self-adjust and go back? And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we saw the value of belonging going up over the last 2 years. And I call belonging a catalyst value. Belonging is connected to other values like safety. When people feel a sense of belonging, they feel safe. They feel like they have a sense of inclusion and trust and purpose even. And when we saw the value of belonging going down, especially now, it didn't even make it into the top 20. We thought this is truly a shift. And so we're going to talk about the role of brands in a minute, but here's where brands and corporations can look at these declining values and say, what can we do to help these people have more of a sense of belonging and adventure in their lives and a little of excitement? That's where brands and corporations can come in and really use these values to great effect. So you can turn to the next slide. And here, I'm not going to read these out loud. I know everyone's going to have access to this, but I did want to provide a few quotes from the different generations. So if you turn to the next slide. So let's talk about the generations, because here's where it starts getting really interesting. Next slide. What we see here is for all the different generations. So I'm going to focus on ambition first. So there is a considerable drop in the value of ambition. But if you look on this slide and you look at Gen Z, for Gen Z, this value actually rose to the #1 value. But when you work with values, it's really important to see the values that flank the shifts in values. So the value of working hard and protecting the family and even thrift has really risen for Gen Z. And remember, these kids are young. I mean, these are teenagers and kids in their early 20s. So we're thinking that since ambition's #1, it's not for egoic reasons or status or wealth with Gen Z. That has rose to the #1 place because they really have a sense of, I have ambition because I want to protect my family. My ambition is really to save the world here. So that's a really important thing to look at. We also see that the characteristic idealism, which has really defined millennials their entire lives, it looks like this is becoming a little bit more sober for millennials, especially now their parents, the oldest millennials are around 43 years old. We see values like self-reliance and helpfulness and working hard and even thrift edge out for millennials, values like enjoying life and even having fun. And even further down the list for millennials are values like social responsibility. And that's very curious when we see that, because millennials sort of reinvented purpose as they started getting older. So that's another thing to really keep your eyes on when it comes to brands and corporations, marketing and engaging with millennials, not only on the outside buying their products, but also internally as employees. And then the last thing I'll mention here is Gen Xers and Boomers. Xers have always been the most practical generation. They're probably the most likely equipped to handle another downturn. But even for them, we see values like simplicity rise to #2 from 15. Values like freedom and enjoying life are becoming much less of a focus. And then for Boomers, what was interesting when we looked at the research is that thrift has risen 13 ranks. But even more important than that, they are the only generation that put social responsibility in the top 10. And for everyone else, it went down. And we hypothesize that this means that it really demonstrates this generation's continued desire to leave a legacy, especially for their millennial kids. So I think we're going to see more older people get more involved in social responsibility and doing good practices in their lives. Okay, so that sort of gives you a look at the generations. You can turn to the next slide. And then these would just give you some OEs. Again, can you flip to the next slide? So these are, well, I sort of already talked about this in terms of the values that have gone down, but it's really important when you study values to put the values that go down against the values that go up, because that's where the most dynamic stories are told. So I sort of already went through the values that are going down by generation. But before I open it up, actually, you can turn to the next slide. Before I open it up, I mean, everyone asks us, when you look at these values, what are some big conclusions that you kind of hypothesize based on these values? And I think the biggest thing that we've learned from this, even apart from what you see on the screen here, is that the #1 thing that we saw from the outtakes of this research is that people really want brands to have empathy right now. Almost like what we were talking about before this call began, empathy and love, and how are brands really wrapping their arms around the people right now, because people are looking to brands and people are looking to their own places of work to help them through this crisis. So I think being empathetic and caring, invite the conversation in, and then show people that you listened. it's very important for corporations and brands to offer very practical solutions to what people are going through right now. And we've seen that demonstrated across so many brands that have really come to the rescue of people right now. And I'm hoping that that continues. Also to keep it simple and avoid information that's complicated or, of course, any inadvertent exploitation of brands. That's a big no-no. I also think that since we saw protecting the family rise to the #1 value across generations, I think it's more important than ever to show your people inside your corporation how you're protecting them. Because their well-being is definitely a direct reflection of your company and your brand. And remember, people really don't need to know how bad it is. They don't need to keep being reminded that we are in, a troubled time. They definitely know it. I think what they need right now is kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, as we guide them as they make their way into what has definitely become a bit of a new normal. So on this slide, what we have here is just a few key takeaways. One is there's definitely a heightened need for stakeholder listening. No doubt about it. It's really the job of brands and corporations to be sure that their communications and actions are aligned with the control and the empowerment that their stakeholders are now seeking. Number 2, a premium on problem solving. I can't emphasize that enough. What are you doing to help people in their own communities solve for big issues? And everybody has a little bit of a different issue right now that they're dealing with. There's also a greater sensitivity toward economic pressures. We're all feeling that right now. So what are we all doing, brands, corporations, to help people in that regard as well? And then the final one, we sort of brainstorming at the agency, it's like return to simple and classic pleasures. People are dying for that right now. So that's about it. That's the research.
Cool. Thank you so much for sharing that, Thérèse. This is how you can get in touch with Thérèse and Christopher at the Zeno Group. This is super fascinating stuff. I want to dive into a great example now of exactly how some of these values might be coming to life. I'm going to shift now to Kfir Gavrieli, who's joining us here in LA. Kfir is the CEO and co-founder of Tieks, TIEKS.com, if you want to go check it out. It's a really super cool fashion brand. You guys make ballet flats and amongst other things. And when we started tracking this story, we were kind of flabbergasted by how you had mobilized your community around a lot of the exact same virtues and values that Thérèse was talking about around self-reliance, thrift, and helpfulness. So let's start by framing a little bit about what Tieks is, how it started, and also how you had social impact baked into this brand from the beginning, right, Kfir, with the work that you were doing around microloans and kiva.org?
Yeah, that's correct. And a lot of what Thérèse just talked about really resonated with me and made sense with a lot of what we've done in the lead up to this pandemic, and really what we've done during this coronavirus as an extension of what we've been doing historically, and embodiment, I think, of what our values as a company are. But briefly, we're a ballet flat designer. We've been for over 10 years designing and selling a brand of foldable, versatile ballet flats, something that it's hard to believe, but in the footwear industry didn't ever really exist in the form that we created. We have a foldable, durable, comfortable, stylish ballet flat. And for any men listening, a ballet flat isn't necessarily for ballet dancing. It's the name of a footwear category. I always need to clarify that. It was started over 10 years ago. We were one of the first brands in the world to be vertically integrated and native to online. So one of the very early direct-to-consumer brands.
Yeah.
And from very early on, we have been involved with Kiva, which you mentioned, which is a micro-lending website. I went to business school with the co-founder of Kiva, Jessica Jackley. And really early on, I recognized that the mission of Kiva is well aligned with our ethos as a brand because we're about empowering women. One way we do it is through versatile shoes that allow women to have more flexibility in their lives. But we try to incorporate that ethos into every aspect of what we do as a company. Kiva aligned well with that. And over the years, we've become the largest individual lender on Kiva in the world through the Gavrieli Foundation, which is our foundation. And it struck me as Thérèse was speaking that this increased emphasis on values like self-reliance, working hard, protecting the family, things that today in the US are becoming more prevalent, in some of these developing countries have always been prominent because they live in a different reality from us. And so our focus through the microloan program, and that's loans ranging in size from as low as $25 to over $1,000, has been to support these values that we know women all over the world hold dear. And so instead of what was prominent at the time, giving a shoe for every shoe that somebody buys, we thought we could have more impact than that by enabling women to become self-sufficient, empowering them through credit in societies where they don't have ready access to capital. And in some of these countries with as little as $25, a woman could buy a coffee machine. She can launch a coffee shop and she can uplift herself, her family, and by extension, her community out of poverty. So that's something we've been focused on for a long time. And the goal is obviously, instead of giving a woman a pair of shoes, empowering her to be able to buy her own pair of shoes, and more importantly, other things that she and her family need and value even more than that. So that's always been our focus, and the mask campaign it kind of dovetails off of that effort to always identify what the most pressing need people have is, and then see how we as a company can participate in helping people achieve what they would want to do themselves otherwise.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Kfir. So it's kind of ingrained into your DNA. And then, so tell us about this moment. Was it like 6 weeks ago, 7 weeks ago, where somebody came to you and said, hey, we there's a shortage of masks, and tell us about that process that led to Sew Together.
Yeah, I remember I'm sure like many other people, a lot of WhatsApp groups. And one of them, my good friend named Miller, sent me a message from his sister, who's a resident at the largest hospital in Los Angeles, LAC-USC. It's, I think, one of the largest public hospitals in the country. And she was freaking out because she recognized that they were running out of PPE and it wasn't going to last more than a couple weeks. This was, during the beginning phase of doctors cycling through, 10 to 20 times as many masks as they normally do in a day. And that's what initially caused us to spring into action. My first thought was, okay, how can we source some of this from overseas? But as many people have heard, that's been quite challenging to cross international borders with PPE. Every country's kind of hunkering down and saying we need whatever excess capacity exists in our country and not letting it be exported. So we resorted then to try to sew masks in our own headquarters. So we bought a fleet of sewing machines and we started sewing. And the need for cotton masks is on the one hand to help prolong the life of medical grade masks, in that if you wear it in conjunction with a N95 mask, it prolongs the life of that mask. They're cotton masks that have pockets for filters that can be added. And then for people who are less likely to be infected, hospitals are asking for these kinds of masks so that they could be used by patients coming in who don't necessarily have COVID. And that helps reserve more of the N95 supply for others. So the need was apparent, and we tried sewing masks. We were making a few hundred a day, then it hit us that if we could somehow engage our community, our fans and our customers to sew masks with us, we could really scale up the impact we're having. And so we launched Operation Sew Together, and the response has just been phenomenal. We managed to overnight, literally erect essentially a distributed factory with thousands of workers, something we couldn't have done in our own headquarters. And yeah, there are just thousands of photos capturing this very real impact. We've now reached over 620,000 masks sewn and distributed mostly locally to hospitals and facilities that the women who are sewing identify in their local communities. About 10% of the masks come to our headquarters, and we distribute from there to hospitals that have reached out that are in pressing need. A lot are going to the most hard-hit areas, Louisiana, New York, Washington, etc. And this really has been, for me as the CEO of the company, perhaps the most rewarding campaign we've ever done.
Yeah, it's incredible what you kind of unlocked in terms of the generosity of the community. And, there's so many great things to unpack about this. I just want to take a second to explain to people. So instead of saying to the community, hey, if you buy a pair of Tieks, we will donate a mask, you said, if you sew a mask, we were going to give you Tieks gift cards, right? And it's $50 for 25 masks. Is that right?
Yeah. And $100 for 50 masks.
$100 for 50 masks. So you were basically incentivizing them through the generosity of Tieks to say, if you do this for other people, we will give something to you. But what happened next kind of surprised you guys as well, right? It kind of went way beyond even that incentive, and people have been making many more masks than the gift cards, and kind of been taking matters into their own hands as well, right?
Yeah, we were, I think, tapping into a latent demand by people in our community to do something, to contribute. I think we saw earlier the value of duty that's arisen recently. That was very noticeable. People wanted to help. We as a brand wanted to help. This was the best idea we had for how we could really do something together. For us as a brand, we haven't discounted in a really long time. And so I think a lot of people appreciate the opportunity for a gift card. We thought that was the least we can do. And we also thought it was the most we could actually do to activate people and kind of get them over the hump. A lot of women had doubts. I don't know, I haven't sewn in a long time. Where would I get a paper pattern? How do I identify a hospital that's in need? And so we kind of nudged them on a few of those points, but really we were just tapping into what everyone had in their own hearts and wanted to contribute. And what you identified is the best reflection of that. Women have continued sewing way beyond whatever the requirement for a gift card is, because they deliver these masks to hospital. They see how grateful the doctors and nurses are, and they can't just go back home and sit on the couch and watch TV. They feel an obligation and also an empowerment to help, and that's kind of the best thing I felt like we could do as a brand.
You said something beautiful when we were preparing for this conversation. You said, all we did is we let people see their own power. And I really love that. You've unlocked a sense of purpose and meaning in people to want to help in a very simple, self-reliant, thrifty, helpful way, What have been some of the highlights of this journey so far in terms of the feedback you've been getting from your community?
The best thing for me is to see how proud the sewers are of what they're doing. And the thought that we helped push them over the edge to sew. One of the best stories I heard was from, you see here, a young lady sewing. One of the best stories has been generations coming together in a safe, socially distanced way, setting up production lines of masks. Women writing in saying how this has brought them closer to their mother, their grandmother, their aunt, their kids. And it's, in my view, such a great way to teach important values in a time where people can have very real impact. I'd say that, and then hearing from hospitals, doctors and nurses, and the gratitude they have for this, which is, I think, a validation of how important and helpful these masks are.
Mm. We have a principle that we talk about at Conspiracy of Love called "Be the helper, not the hero," and it's a really important point for brands as you're navigating this stuff. Don't make yourself the hero of whatever action you're taking. Instead, let your consumers, in this case, be the heroes. And all you have to do is create a platform that's in line with your values, that's authentic to you, and then create this opportunity for them to really step in. So I think it's a remarkable journey. I also want to point out that Tieks is doing something really powerful for Mother's Day as well. I highly recommend you go check this out. This is another example of how you're helping the community express the love for their own mothers. Tell us a little bit about this as well.
Yeah, obviously Mother's Day is a big holiday for us. We're a women's shoe company. And we were thinking, again, kind of like with the masks, what is most needed now? With the masks, we could have done shoes for frontline workers or something to that effect, but we thought the most important thing in that moment was to help protect people. And we saw the value on safety, et cetera. And so we wanted to participate somewhere along that dimension. Now for Mother's Day, the thinking is what is most needed for moms who are in quarantine, who are isolated from their loved ones. The most important thing you could send a mom now is a love note, is beyond any particular product. And of course, we always hope that people will think to send Tieks, but instead of saying, hey, buy your mom Tieks this year, we said the most important thing you could do is send her a story about how much you love her. Bring a smile to her face, connect with her, maybe even tears of happiness. And so we asked people to start their stories or include in their stories a line about, I will never forget when, ... and share an anecdote with your mom that'll kind of bring her back to a happier time, and that captures the unique love we have for moms, which really is a love unlike any other. And so we're just, as a brand, tapping into that, and it's been very rewarding to have thousands of women participate and trust our brand to deliver these kinds of messages to moms. And like you just showed, we've been featuring some of the most powerful stories on our website, and on Mother's Day we plan on running that to let anyone who wants read through some of these very powerful stories.
Yeah, I've been reading some of them. I gotta say, bring Kleenex if you're gonna do it. It's so powerful. Really amazing work, Kfir. I think you had 14,000 women who've now submitted notes to their mom and climbing, so it's just remarkable.
Thank you.
Well, if you want to get involved, just go look up Tieks, TIEKS.com, and sew together. I think it's a wonderful example of, there's this quote we've been using a lot: the opposite of hopelessness is helpfulness. And what you are giving is a platform for people to be helpful in a way that inspires hope. So thank you for coming and sharing your story with us, Kfir, and stick around for some questions. Thank you.
Will do. And just to, if I could say one more thing, I really loved what you said about the real heroes are the women sewing. The real heroes are the moms. The real heroes are the frontline workers. We as a brand, we really don't mind taking a back seat and just helping people do what we think is right during this time. And I think it's a reflection of also the kind of values that are becoming more prominent during this time.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kfir Gavrieli from Tieks. All right, we're going to keep moving on. And next we have Ashley Spillane from Impactual. Ashley, thanks for joining us. Ashley, so for those of you who need a little bit of context, you were one of the people behind Rock the Vote all those many years ago, right? One of the best examples of making voting cool, right?
I was not a founder, but I was involved as running the organization later in its history.
One of the organizations. And so tell us a little bit about Impactual and what it's all about now.
Yeah, so I started a small consulting firm called Impactual to advise brands and philanthropists on how to do civic engagement work better and more powerfully and impactfully, just to make sure that, as I see it, so much of what we do every day, the challenges we encounter, the solutions we celebrate, are really centered around how we self-govern as a society. And having a say in that self-governance is really important, and not enough people in our country are taking advantage of the opportunity they have to make decisions about how we govern and what policies affect us. In any given election, you have between 40 and 60% of the population that sit out. And I think we need to really shift as Americans towards a culture of voting and being civically engaged. And I think that companies and brands have a huge role to play in helping us do that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the introduction. Let's dive in and let's see what's going on with regard to 2020.
Yeah, well, speaking of letting people see their own power, we have a huge election ahead of us in 180 days. We're obviously in the midst of a really difficult time, and what is a complicated time for voting, since it's a practice that most Americans do on a single day in November, and in person at busy polling places, all of the things that we are asked to stay clear of right now in the middle of COVID-19. But as Thérèse was saying, people are feeling a duty and responsibility and an ambition to pull all of the levers available to them to help make their lives better, to help make sure that their neighbors and their families are taken care of, and to leave a positive legacy. And one of the ways to do that is through voting. And so I wanted to start by saying we will vote in 2020. We will have an election. This is mandated in the Constitution. And we have a history as Americans of voting in really difficult times of crisis in our past, the Civil War, the 2 world wars. And so I put a great amount of hope in the fact that we have this anchor point ahead of us where we will cast a ballot, but it's not going to be without challenges. One of the things that we have in this country, in all 50 states, we have different laws that regulate whether to be registered to vote before you go to the polls or not. And when I was at Rock the Vote, we often saw that on election day was the day that so many people would come to the website and try to get registered to vote, not realizing that it's something that you have to do before the election in your state in order to participate. And so one of the things that has been really helpful since the early 90s through the Voting Rights Act and the voter registration programs has been that you're able to register to vote at the DMVs, at your Department of Motor Vehicles, when you're getting your license or you're moving and updating your address. And in 2016, there were about 25 million people in that election cycle that registered to vote at their local DMVs. And in 2020, we projected that number would be higher. However, now with DMVs closed, we're estimating that 8 to 10 million people who would otherwise register in that way won't be getting registered. That's not to account for the number of voter registration efforts that tend to happen outside your local grocery store or at a concert where young people might sign up, or at their college campus, where those programs are also being shut down. The other challenge is that we need people to be available to work at the elections. We've just seen in Wisconsin real challenges identifying enough people to serve as poll workers and to go in their local community and greet the voters coming in, get them all set up to vote. It's a really important job. Almost 60% of the people in our country who do it are over the age of 60, usually retirees in the community who are offering that service up. And in November, depending on where we are with this pandemic and this public health crisis, we're really going to need a lot more young, healthy people who can serve as poll workers. The other thing is that we have a decentralized election system. All 50 states get to make up their rules and regulations, and so it's not the case that everyone in America, without an excuse, can request an absentee ballot or vote early in person. Those rules differ. There are certainly more states coming online regularly, and with COVID-19, a lot of states are changing their rules so that you don't have to submit an excuse. But we don't have a culture of voting 100% vote by mail across this country, and so we know that people will need a lot of help getting clear on what the rules are, what the forms are that they have to figure out in order to make sure that they get their ballots. If they are voting by mail, if they're going to vote early in person, where lines might be decreased, they'll need help navigating where those locations are that they can go. And then we also need to make sure that there are places available on election day for people who aren't able to do the first two, voting by mail or in person. And so I talk a lot. I talk a lot with companies and brands about what they can do to make a real difference. And I have long been a huge fan of engaging brands to help change the culture we have around voting. And this year, it has just become even more important. I think as we were looking at that research in the first presentation, we are looking at companies and brands as needing to be a part of solving problems. And the upcoming election has a couple of them that we really need a lot of help with. One of them is around voter registration. So I shared there's going to be a lot of people who aren't automatically registered through their local DMVs, a lot of people who don't have access to voter registration forms or reminders from people in their community. We are going to need as much help as possible from brands to help promote voter registration early and often, whether that's on your website, through your social platforms, email accounts. If you're delivering actual physical products to people during this time, throwing in the national voter registration form alongside of it with the location that they can return it to, all very important. If we do move to a system where voters are being either automatically mailed ballots to their address or are having to request mailed ballots, you have to be registered at the address to which the ballot is going to be mailed. So this puts a real premium on voter registration in 2020. We will also have a huge amount of education to do about sharing when to request an absentee ballot or a vote by mail ballot and how to request it. What's the form in your state? What's the system you have to go through? There are some amazing digital platforms and nonprofit partners that do provide people the opportunity to both register to vote and request absentee ballots online. And if there is a mail component or a print and mail component to it, they'll actually print and send you your information so you can submit it. There's also, I think, going to be, we've seen this just during the primaries in this first little bit of the pandemic this year. States are trying to grapple with what to do themselves and trying to figure out, should we postpone our primary? Should we hold it but change the locations? If we don't have enough workers, do we have to scale back the number of locations that we have available for people to vote at? All of that makes an already pretty confusing process even more confusing. And so making sure that we're sharing, nonpartisan, nonprofit resources that people can contact to get help and navigate through is really important. We love the 866 Our Vote hotline. You can text or call and ask your questions, and they will connect you with local, your state-based volunteer lawyers who help answer those questions. As I said, we're going to need a lot more people signing up to be poll workers. So there's a great resource, workelections.com. People can promote if you have employees or consumers. As Kfir was saying, there's a lot of people that want to be called into action right now and want to be really positively participating and contributing to their local community. This is another great way to do that. And then, just from a brand perspective, getting really vocal about your support for safe and secure voting options for employees and consumers is important. I was saying this before the call, but there's a lot of politics around right now. There's a lot of federal conversations happening about the politics around absentee and early voting. These are not as true state to state. The election officials in these states, they all want to do their job well. They want to make sure that people have access to vote, and whatever we can be doing to help support them and help make sure that they have the backing that they need to move forward with the reforms that they'll need to help the elections go smoothly is really important. A couple of resources that we love and are available to folks who are thinking about getting involved. There's a nonprofit organization called the Civic Alliance, where you can get a full suite of resources, including toolkits or regular email updates that help you navigate what the tentpole moments are throughout the election cycle for when you should be sort of engaging your folks or submitting calls to action. There's a really robust network of corporations that also convene and share information with each other about programs that they're running, programs they've run in the past, the aspects that worked, that didn't work. And it's a really lovely space where companies are sharing with each other how to do this work. There are two great holidays, National Voter Registration Day on September 22nd and Vote Early Day on October 24th. That are two distinct nonprofit efforts that help engage people and just try to raise awareness, use it as a really catalyzing moment to raise awareness about the different opportunities that you have. And it's a really wonderful thing we see every year. Tons of companies post about this. You have people from all political parties posting and trying to celebrate and raise awareness around these days. As I mentioned before, one of the nonprofits that does provide online voter registration and absentee ballot resources, you can actually get a custom link for your brand from this organization, TurboVote, and they'll send you a link that can be specific to your company. And then whenever you promote that, whether that's in email to your employees or consumers, or you're posting it publicly on social media, it'll actually allow you to track what kind of impact you're having. And I love that so much for companies, because it really allows you to see whether you're making an impact and whether people are taking advantage of the resources you're giving out. And then there's another great group called Pizza to the Polls. And much like what we've heard today, depending on what happens in November and whether there's the capacity to bring pizzas to the polls, they historically have delivered pizzas to polling locations that have long lines, just to keep people happy and well fed while they wait in line to cast their ballot. They will likely continue to deliver food to poll workers and to voters in 2020. They're also thinking about what kinds of supplies can they be packaging up to send to poll workers too. So, we might have to talk after about this mask program to see if we can get people to start helping with producing those for poll workers. But they're a great resource as well. And then one quick opportunity, it's a very real, recent, now immediate opportunity to take advantage of. There is a coalition of brands that is coming together to put out an ad in the Wall Street Journal on Tuesday, just reiterating their support for these safe and secure options of early voting. And so to the extent that there are any companies on the call or watching this that are interested in signing up, you can do so at voteearlyday.org. And I will post this presentation along with, there's a couple of other great guides to how to get involved in the election on our website, impactual.com/resources. I also co-authored a case study on behalf of the Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center with Sophia Gross from Snapchat. And there's a ton of great resources in that if anyone's interested in digging in further. And we're always happy to be helpful.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ashley. We'll be distributing this presentation as well as Therese's directly after this. There'll be a Dropbox link so people can access it as well. Super fascinating stuff. I'm going to hand over to Bobby for the remaining 10 minutes that we have to see what questions we have. Bobby, over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for this really, really informative presentations and dialogue. We have a couple of questions, and I'll go around and I have a couple to add. Our first is, Ashley, for you from our friend Life Enhancer, who asked, if you travel and live in various locations throughout the year, what state can you actually register to vote in 2020?
So it depends on the state law. And what I love about TurboVote is that they have all of those rules and regulations. And so if you go on turbovote.org, you can check out and see what state is probably best. I mean, it's usually your primary state of residence, but there are residency requirements that are posted up there that you can take a quick look at.
All right, great. Thank you. Thérèse, I have a question for you from Peter Raymond. So a couple of weeks ago, we've looked at a variety of different research reports in terms of generational reactions to COVID, and one of those a few weeks ago talked about the fact that young people wanted, what they wanted most from brands at the moment was to be empowered to help in some way. It sounds as if your research is showing that it's not just limited to young people, that it's across generations. And so is it your advice to brands to look at across generations and demographics, how to engage them, how to hold their hand and in a lot of ways enable them to be of service right now?
I love that question. Thank you. So the reason why we look at values is that if you understand the shared values and the differentiated values of the generations, you can communicate them on a very relevant and personal basis. So the reason why we did this research is to help our own clients understand those shared values across all the generations. And then I talked about Gen Z. Gen Z has a very different approach to brands. Their favorite brands are themselves. And the reason that is that they use brands to help find solutions to problems, and they're powered by them. So I do think every generation has a little bit of a different take on what the solutions are to the problems facing the world right now. And I think the job for brands is to understand those personal values that each of their generational cohorts values most, and then what the shared values are across the board, because the biggest thing people want right now is for brands to mirror their values.
I love that. Kfir, I have a question for you. One of our friends, Meredith Ferguson of Do Something Strategic, had a quote a couple of weeks ago that we loved, in which she said, your email list does not equate to a community. And, we see a lot of brands right now that are trying to engage people, but have realized they didn't actually have a community to engage in the first place. So I'm curious, how has Tieks looked at community building as a brand before COVID-19 in a way that allowed you to engage them and activate them so effectively once COVID-19 actually hit?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's something we take very seriously. I remember one of the first marketing books I ever read before starting Tieks was The Culting of Brands, and how you create a real community around what some people might perceive as just a shoe, but we've always tried to be more than that. I think first and foremost, you have to stand for something more than just your product. And that's the ethos we were speaking about earlier about empowering women. And then beyond having that as a goal, you actually have to show that you're kind of in the trenches living up to what you say your values are. And that's something we've done throughout the years. We've seen manifestations of the actual community in everything from Facebook groups to women scheduling trips together with other lovers of Tieks, women they've never even met before. Our Facebook groups, the connection among women who know nothing about each other except that they all love our product, I think is, for me, the purest form of what you're describing, which is being about more than just the product as a brand, and creating a community and then being a part of it, not trying to be the hero, but empowering women to get what they want out of the community that we built.
Love that, and I think Tieks has done a great job of that, and you know, the recent impact, I think, is evidence of that. I have a question from Michelle for Ashley regarding the 2020 elections in November. Do you feel that these events around the election will go back to physical events versus testing the virtual space for voting?
I think we just don't know what is going to happen in terms of the public health situation and whether people will feel comfortable going out. And so for us, you know, whether we're sort of under stay at home orders again, or everything is returned to normal, but people who are feeling vulnerable aren't going out, that we just want to make sure they have safe and secure ways that they can still make their voice heard in the election. And that, you know, if whether that be by mail or going to a less crowded early voting in-person opportunity are both really important.
Okay, great. I have one question for Thérèse, and if we have time, I have a second question for the panel. For Thérèse, can you speak to why you, or any thoughts as to why there's a different social responsibility with millennials right now?
I'm sorry, why the decrease in social responsibility?
Yeah, you know, you said that there was a dip, or it seems as though there was a decline in social responsibility amongst millennials right now. Were there any insights as to why you think that's happening?
Yes, I think millennials, probably apart from all the other generations, are likely feeling the most overwhelmed on many levels, because they are raising families for the first time. And even when millennials started becoming parents, it was a bit overwhelming for them because their biggest value is to retain their authenticity and self-expression. And so millennials are trying to be really good employees. They're trying to be really good moms and dads. They're trying to be very aware about the world around them. They have homes for the first time. So I think their role in terms of social responsibility is not really at the front of their minds right now, because I think they're so overwhelmed. But not that others aren't, but I think millennials as a generation are maybe the most overwhelmed. So they're not really thinking about that. And I don't want to make it sound like they're not being socially responsible, because of course they are. But the value of social responsibility and purpose is not really front and center. They're more taking care of their family. I mean, remember, their kids are little, and you know, a lot of them are pregnant right now, or they're just starting to have families. So that's really what's on top of their minds right now.
Got it. Thank you. Do we have time for one more question, or after we? Okay. So one more question for the panel. Do you all see a shift in attitude to a kinder and more giving society? A society that each generation wants to continue as states attempt to get back to the new normal. So do you think this feeling of kindness and generosity and all these things that we're speaking about and celebrating, do you think that as we get back to whatever this idea of a new normal is, when states open back up, will continue on the other side of this?
And I can definitely jump in on that answer because it speaks to values and human qualities. I do think that we're going to be a much more empathetic society after this. I mean, I have to say that there are brands out there that are studying empathy very deeply right now. I mean, we're working with Lenovo, which is a big global technology company, and they're doing research right now about what their role is in helping people become more empathetic. So I do think that as a society, as a world, we are going to want to understand more how we can practice empathy and love and all those things that come along with it.
I love it. Ashley and Kfir, do you want to add anything as last words?
I would say I agree. I can't imagine going through what we've been through without there being long-lasting effects. There's been, as we've kind of come to a new normal, we've also come back to a lot of fundamentals. We've stripped away a lot of non-essential, superficial things, and I think people are recognizing the value of being a part of a community and helping when they can and receiving help when they need it in ways that for a lot of us in our entire lifetime we've never seen before. So I think definitely a lot of that will stick and carry forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've just taken such a powerful collective action together as a society for the greater good. And it wasn't easy, and it's been hard for a lot of people. And I think that, you know, even though the news isn't always focused on the tens of millions of people that have done this and are doing great things, this has been a really powerful show of what is possible and kindness and generosity when you're considering other people. And I can't imagine that we don't walk forward with carrying this with us all.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for the questions you've sent in. I want to say thank you to our panelists, to Thérèse, Kfir, Ashley. You guys were amazing. All of this is going to go up on YouTube right away, so stick around for the email, which should be hitting your inbox in the next few minutes. Don't forget to sign up for next week's webinar. We have some equally fantastic guests. All that remains is for us to sign off and say, stay safe, stay well, and don't forget to look after each other. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Love what you're doing. Keep it up. Thank you.
Bye-bye.